Hello everyone, this is Brandon Thomas here, and welcome back to my Automation Journey series. In today's video, I'll be discussing two key things. One, Ansible's architecture, which is how it's structured, and two, the CLI, which is how you can personally interact with it. Now, if you're a beginner or you're just new to Ansible, understanding these two parts will make everything else easier down the road. Now, without further ado, let's get into it. So the first thing I'd like to talk about is Ansible's architecture, and at the center of all of it is something called the control node. Now this is essentially the machines where you actually run Ansible at, and you can carry out a bunch of different tasks, whether that's creating and writing your playbooks, defining your inventory, or running your commands at this particular stage of the architecture. From there, Ansible is actually able to connect to your managed nodes, which are the machines or devices that you actually want to automate at. And the cool thing about this is that Ansible's agentless, meaning that you don't need to install anything to access those remote systems. All you simply need to do is to connect to SSH, which will then connect you directly to those hosts. And from there, it will save you a lot of time and complexity throughout the process. Now, to tell Ansible which machines to work with, you can create something called an inventory file. And within this file, you simply will just list your IP addresses or your host names of your managed nodes. And what overall makes inventories so essential and cool is that it focuses on precision. So you're not just saying run this everywhere, run this anywhere. You can simply just target the group of hosts that you want, group them by environments, and you also can even attach custom variables to individual machines or even entire groups. And overall, I believe this gives a lot of control. It makes your automation much cleaner, more organized, and it just makes it easier to scale overall. Now, once you understand where things are going, the next step is telling Ansible what to do. And this is where playbooks come into the equation. So playbooks are essentially YAML files that lay out automation step by step. So you can think of it as like a checklist written in code. Now, playbooks is obviously like the infrastructure of the automation and is a very important piece, but I would say that it doesn't do the heavy lifting alone. And it's heavily reliant on something called modules, which essentially carries out each task for you. So this could be something like installing packages or even restarting your services. And modules are tools Ansible uses under the hood, essentially. Now, tons come built in that Ansible already has. So there's a bunch of pre-built-in modules that Ansible has that you can use to automate any type of task you want. But you also could, have your own custom modules built and created if wanted. Now, the last thing I'd like to talk about within Ansible's architecture is something called plugins. And this essentially extends the core functionality within Ansible itself. So you could do things, whether it's from logging and email alerts to handling different connection types. Most of the work with plugins is behind the scenes, I would say, but they overall help make automation much more flexible and efficient. Now, I would like to shift my focus over to Ansible's command line interface, or the CLI, which is where you actually run Ansible in itself. So there is actually a few key tools I think that beginners should become comfortable with as they grow within their automation journey. One of those is called Ansible, as it's meant for quick one-off tasks on your managed nodes. And this can be really great for things like testing overall. Ansible-Playbook is also really another important one, as this runs your full automation workflow. And a workflow is essentially just a series of tasks run in order, which is defined within your playbook. Ansible-Inventory and Ansible-Doc have been two really personal favorites of mine that I've been using throughout this past week or so. And with Ansible-Inventory, it lets you explore or troubleshoot from your inventory setup. With Ansible-Doc, this essentially just shows your documentation on all modules and plugins right from your terminal, which is really key. The last one I'd like to talk about is Ansible-Config, which essentially just shows your configuration settings like default paths and privilege rules overall. So I would say don't get too worked up about trying to memorize these different type of command line tools right away, as the more you automate, the more natural you'll have like a feel for all these different command line tools. So don't get worked up over this. Also, I'd like to point out a couple helpful flags for me that I've used throughout the week that have made just using and navigating the CLI much easier. The -- check command lets you preview changes without making them, and this is also known as dry run mode. So this is really important to know to make things easier for you. -V or -V, which is also known as verbose mode, increases output detail. So this can be really super useful when you're trying to debug your code if there's an issue involved. And then the last one I'd like to talk about is -I, which lets you specify an inventory file if it's not within that specific default location. So those are just a couple of flags that have helped me throughout that week. And I think that can help you as well when you get started. So overall, this week just really gave me a really solid foundation on how Ansible is structured and how the CLI all ties it together. And honestly, it's really starting to click for me, and I'm really excited to just keep going. In next week's video, I'll be diving into the anatomy of a playbook. So this will discuss things like how they're structured, what's inside of it, and how do you actually write your first one. So I hope you guys really enjoyed this video, and I'll see you in the next one. Thank you for listening.